Hey, what's up everybody? Here it is, the Nikon Z9. I've had it for about 3 weeks, closer to a month. I wasn't able to shoot with it as much as I would have liked during that time. I injured my back a little bit and just had a sore muscle that was keeping me out for a while. Out from not going shooting. And so, anyway, I slowly have been getting better and been able to get out and shoot and been doing some more workshops and stuff like that as well. So I wanted to give you my thoughts on this camera after shooting it for a few weeks. So there's a few things I want to mention before I dive into all of my thoughts on this camera. Number one, I don't think I can give a good, honest overall review of any camera after just a few weeks of shooting with it. Honestly, it's been for me the equivalent of like maybe a week and a half of shooting pretty steadily with it, even though I've had it for a little bit longer than that. The main reason being, I need to know a camera intimately, inside and out. I need to be able to change settings without thinking, without looking, without taking my eye out of the viewfinder, and I'm not quite there yet with this camera. It takes me a while. Everybody probably has a different amount of time where they kind of get used to a camera and are able to do exactly what I'm talking about with it. But for me, it takes a while, especially when I went from a DSLR to the first mirrorless, the Nikon Z6 II. Massive change there, understandably. Took me, I would say, probably a good 2 to 3 months before I was really comfortable with shooting that camera. Now, going from the Z6 II to the Z9, let me try and say that again, that's fun. Going from the Z6 II and upgrading to the Z9 is a little bit more seamless, but there's still a lot of different changes. There's a different button placement sometimes. Even though it's still a Nikon, it's still very familiar to me. I know what everything means when I look at it intuitively. I didn't have to take the time and read a manual or anything like that. But just being able to have my hand reach for a spot, reach for a button, change a setting, customizing everything to change the settings the way I wanted, any number of things like that still take me some time. And so that usually means either a missed shot or at least a missed opportunity. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing is, I know from my past experience, just like the Z6 II, with more time, I'm gonna like this camera more. Right now, my opinion of it is a little bit polarized from day to day. One day I go out and I love the camera, and it's funny, I send a message to some of my friends and say, oh, this camera's amazing, and then the next day I'm completely, crapping on the camera and saying, oh, it's not doing anything right, So that to me just means I haven't fully gotten used to the camera yet. It was the exact same way when I got the Z6 II, and it took me, like I said, a few months to kind of get into the flow and really understand it. So I'm going to give you my first impressions of this camera, but just keep that in mind that I already know my impressions are going to change over time. I know I'm going to end up liking the camera more as I get more used to it. And I also know that I'm just going to get better with it as I figure out what the camera does great and what it doesn't do great. So those are the couple things I wanted to mention before I really dive into what I think of this camera. First off, I thought I might try doing this review a little bit differently. Instead of having you sit there and watch me talk like this, I thought I'd talk over the actual footage of me shooting this camera. So I hooked up my external monitor and recorded through the viewfinder so you could see me doing some photography out in the field, so you can actually see what this camera's doing. And I thought I'd just talk over that. I'm not going to talk specifically about what's happening in those moments necessarily, but you can at least get an idea of what this camera is doing, what it looks like when you're looking through the viewfinder and shooting, especially with the different eye tracking modes and stuff like that. Let's jump over some footage and give that a shot. Real quick, before we jump into some of these videos through the lens, I want you to be aware of this issue that you can see in this video of the image jumping and kind of bouncing around whenever I take a single photo. So it doesn't happen when I take a burst of photos. It just happens with the first image of that burst. And so it's really annoying to me when I'm shooting to see the image bouncing around like that, but I've been told by Nikon it is not an issue, and it's something called pre-exposure centering. I don't know, it's all beyond my technical understanding, I guess, but yeah, it's just unfortunate. It can be fixed if I turn off VR, or some newer lenses, I think, maybe don't have the issue, or if they're set in sport mode, they don't have the issue. But in any case, I'm shooting my 500 f4G and have the VR on, and every time I take a single exposure, the image just starts to bounce around. So you're going to see that throughout this video. Just know that it doesn't affect the image quality or anything like that. The images seem fine, and like I said, I was told by Nikon that is normal behavior. So not sure if it's something that'll ever change or if that's just something kind of have to deal with. But at least when you take a burst of photos, you do get to see nice smooth imagery throughout at that point. So what you're seeing here is just the standard 3D tracking mode with bird eye or animal eye detection on. And you can see it does a pretty good job for the most part, but there are plenty of times where the eye tracking bounces over to the body or misses entirely. Now, it's hard to say in those moments if the focus is actually shifting or if it's just the indicator box. I don't really know. I haven't been able to like really slow down and test that. This is just me going out in the field and actually shooting some actual wildlife, some real birds in the field, just like I normally would. And what I've noticed is after shooting a lot of images and looking at them on the computer, my in-focus percentage is basically on par with what I'm used to from shooting a DSLR for the past 15 years with birds and wildlife. And that is roughly 60 to 70%, I would guess, are in focus. I've never actually, looked at the numbers and calculated a percentage, but just the feeling that I get is about 60 to 70% of every image I shoot, or most images I shoot, are in focus or at least acceptably sharp for me. And it kind of feels the same with this camera. So not an improvement in that regard, but at least on par with what I'm used to. And so I don't feel like it's a downgrade. Now, the advantage is when it works, it allows me to freely compose the image the way I want, which is certainly an advantage over a DSLR. And if I'm getting the same percentage of in-focus images as I was with the DSLR, with the advantage of being able to freely compose without having to move my focus point, that piping plover was moving there, I think that's an improvement, right? So that's a wonderful thing. This mode right here is now using just the general animal detect or animal tracking mode. So I don't have that single focus point or that box to start with the 3D tracking, and you can see it didn't do a great job on that Sanderling. Here it did manage to pick it up, but there's all these snails on the ground that do seem to distract it, and as the bird gets smaller in the frame, it's no longer able to detect the head or eye. It's just doing more of a body thing and then randomly grabbing onto other things like that. So I have found, at least in many of these scenarios, that just like you see there, I switch back to 3D tracking and then it does a lot better job of tracking what I told it to at that point. So still pretty good that it's catching the head and eye there in that circumstance. And these birds are smaller in the frame, So as you can see here, this is that wonderful advantage of being able to freely compose the image the way I want. Is it staying on the head here? No, but at this distance, I don't really think it matters. The body should be just fine. It did get quite distracted here, as you can see, with moving waves in the background, even though my subject is basically not moving and I'm not moving that much. So that was pretty interesting, but it's certainly not foolproof. So overall, at this point, shooting the Nikon Z9 with the 3D tracking and the eye tracking for birds, I would say it's really nice. There are times that it works wonderfully, but it's not foolproof, and I haven't really found myself saying, wow, I couldn't have gotten this shot without this camera. I feel like I've told myself, hey, this has made this shot easier to capture because of this 3D tracking mode and because of the eye detection. It maybe has made that shot easier, but I don't feel like it's been a shot that I could not have gotten with my DSLR. I may have just had to work a little harder to get it. And I don't know, I guess I just feel that that's a saying I've heard from people a lot that have been shooting this mirrorless, is like, oh, it enables me to get all these photos I never could have gotten before. And up until now, like I said, I'm sure my opinion will change, but up until this point, I have not experienced that. I have over and over again, though, experienced saying to myself, wow, this is really nice. This is a lot easier. It's wonderful to be able to compose like this. And you can see me doing it right there, right? Just swinging the image around and being able to grab focus and compose freely. And now I'm trying to shoot some action, which goes interestingly. And I did manage to get this Godwit sharp, which was kind of cool. What I've noticed and feel like is if I shoot it just like a DSLR, so single point autofocus, continuous autofocus, it feels just like any other high-end Nikon DSLR I've owned in the past. So my first high-end Nikon DSLR was a Nikon D3S, and then 4 years later I got the D4S, and now I think it's going on almost 7 to 8 years later, I now have the Z9. So build quality amazing, obviously. You know, the pro body, the full-size camera body like this, always great. I love having the vertical shutter grip, and I just love the feel of it. I do like that it's a little bit more compact and smaller. It fits really good in my hand, better, and it's a little bit lighter than those big tanks of cameras that I previously had and still have that D4S. Probably not for long now. So in any case, if I shoot it just like that, for the most part, other than one very specific scenario, it performs the same way. So that's really nice, you know? So that means I can just kind of have the same expectations there. The next thing is, I know everybody wants to know about, is the bird eye autofocus tracking, the 3D tracking, and how all that works. It's hard to say right now, you know? This is the thing that's the most polarizing to me. I think, number one, I probably had a little too high expectations, just from everything I heard and maybe everything I wanted it to be. There are times where I've said to myself, wow, this is really incredible. Hands down, when it works, it makes shooting so much easier. Just being able to freely compose however you want and have the focus stick with your subject and stay at least on the head and eye has been wonderful. So that's been a really nice thing. Even more so when I'm shooting vertically, I've noticed. And absolutely love the vertical flip screen so that I can kind of shoot low that way. That's been a wonderful thing. I've used it a ton. So here is the biggest challenge that I found for this camera, and that is photographing songbirds in a forest like this. And you can see it's doing a wonderful job right now of tracking the eye on this pine warbler. And it doesn't matter how I compose it, it's doing a pretty good job. Staying with it, and then it jumps off. So now this is another scene, and this is where the problem happens. It caught focus on the background. I'm switching to just a single point. At this point, I have to come all the way over to that huge clump of trees before it will gain focus. And once it has it, it's doing a great job. But over and over again, like this, if I miss focus, you can see the out of focus bird underneath. I have to jump all the way up to something else. And DSLRs didn't do that. And from everything I understand, it's just a mirrorless problem across the board. Nikon may be worse at it than some of the other manufacturers, but I've talked to photographers shooting Canon, Sony, and they all have the same issues. And so I don't know that a lot of people do like this type of photography with these cameras as much, but it's surprising to me that it hasn't been as big a deal, or as big a stink hasn't been made about it. So you can see I'm just going to keep trying a couple different things. This is just some backyard feeder stuff here, and it grabbed that. So here's a test I did of just recording this. No birds, so watch. If I miss and focus back there, now I've let go. I'm pressing the focus button again. It's not leaving. It's not even trying to search forward. I have to come all the way up to a bigger chunk of stuff or something really bright in order for it to even attempt it. And even then, it searches. So again, I'm pressing the shutter button, pressing the focus button. It's not coming back to the bird. You can see the bird out of focus there. I have to jump all the way over there in order to bring it back and get it. Here's another attempt. It's locked on the background. I'm on that bird, trying like crazy to get it to focus. It will not come forward. I have to manually, in this case, rack focus and get it back in order to get it to work. So a big problem when you're shooting this type of stuff in the field anytime you miss. Now, here's an attempt on using the bird eye tracking on a brown-headed nuthatch. Now, granted, it's backlit, not flattering lighting. It's against a tree bark scene there, but you can see every single time, like it just, I mean, this bird's moving fast, but it grabs the bird and then just immediately moves over and starts tracking on some of the tree itself. So it doesn't do a great job with this. Not that I really expected it to do anything there, but I don't know. I guess I thought it might have grabbed the bird in the head a little bit better. There I was able to grab some shots, and now it's kind of hanging on while the bird's not moving much. But as soon as the bird moves a little bit, it's definitely struggling with that. So back to single point autofocus though, and then I can do a lot better of grabbing, I mean, pretty precisely grabbing through some foreground branches there. And this does a lot better job. So I do think that I'm probably going to end up using just a standard single autofocus point when I'm photographing songbirds when the season really hits, because unless that bird is really close and I've already locked in on it, the 3D tracking, the eye tracking, not doing so hot. This bird, however, certainly easy to grab focus on. And then I'll switch over to the tracking, and you can see that big black eye does a really great job of just staying with it no matter how I compose. So that's kind of cool. Here's another test. You can see I focused on the background, and now it's just struggling like crazy to come back to the leaf in the foreground. And in just a second, I'm going to show you really horrible footage because I just held my phone up to my DSLR. But watch what happens when I do the same test in the same spot with a DSLR. You'll see how fast it comes snapping back into play, and then I can grab focus with no issue with the DSLR. Whereas with this Z9 or any of the mirrorless cameras I've shot, including the Z6 II, it just does not want to leave the background. Here we go. Here's the D4S. Snap back. Look at that. It jumped right back. So watch. I'll shoot it back to the background, back to the foreground, to the background, to the foreground. It just so seamlessly goes back and forth. And man, I really wish I still had that. I tend to shoot a lot of drama in my shots, and what I mean by that is dramatic lighting, both with strong side light, lots of foreground, especially when I'm starting to shoot into the early morning sun or late evening sun. So when that sun's low in the sky and I'm shooting into it for my silhouettes and different backlit images, I know that pushes cameras. That makes the best DSLRs I've ever shot struggle to find focus and get focus and maintain focus. So I know that's a tough scenario for these cameras, but there are times where it's just locking in and it's doing great, and even times where I'm shooting severely underexposed and it's tracking the eye and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then there's other times where I'm doing the same thing and it's completely falling apart and can't focus on anything, and in which case it's really nice. I just press another button really quick here, and I've gotten used to that, and I go back to my single point autofocus, and that usually works pretty well. So that's a nice thing to have as a backup. And that's basically how I've configured it. I don't shoot back button autofocus, at least not the way most people do. I use my back button to lock autofocus instead of initiate it. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I actually like that better. I think it is kind of better in the end, but whatever. We won't get into that now. So in any case, my shutter button is usually doing the 3D tracking, and it's set to just bird or animal eye autofocus. So it's picking up on the bird's eye for me. And then one of my function buttons, I think it's function 1, doesn't matter really, will automatically switch me over to my single point if I'm having that failure. So that's a really nice thing. It's great to be able to just hit a button, not take my eye out of the viewfinder, and fall back to that standard, more accurate, I guess, in those circumstances, autofocus. All right, back to some live footage through the viewfinder here with a pair of marbled Godwits. I'm just going to let you watch what this camera's doing in the background while I talk about a couple more points before I wrap up my thoughts on the Nikon Z9. So I'm actually recording this audio right now about a week after I recorded most of my thoughts on this camera. And in that week, I actually had some more time to get in a lot of shooting. A lot of my style of shooting, backlit, silhouette, heavy shooting into the sun, shot a lot of wide angle stuff as well, with some really friendly birds and wading birds and shorebirds in Florida. And so I gotta say, just exactly like I thought, I like the camera more already. Just a week later than when I recorded most of my thoughts on this review, or this thoughts on this camera piece that I'm putting out here. And so it's already showing me exactly what I anticipated, which is the more I get used to the camera, the more I'm going to like it, the more I'll get used to what works and what doesn't. And I got some wonderful, amazing shots with the camera over this past week of shooting. And so, yeah, I think in the end it's going to be a great camera. I'm very happy with the purchase. I still don't feel like it's this, insane leap forward that I maybe expected myself or that I was hearing from others. Are there improvements? Most definitely. Are there some shortcomings? Most definitely. And I think you saw the major one just a little bit ago when I showed you through the lens as I was trying to photograph that pine warbler and some other songbirds bouncing around some trees. That's the biggest shortcoming, I will say. But like I said, from those that I've talked to that I do trust, it seems like it's kind of a mirrorless thing across the board. Hopefully it can slowly be improved with time, though. So one other thing I wanted to mention before I wrap up is the files. I could show them to you here, but I'm sure you've seen plenty of files online, and seeing them in a video like this is probably not going to do them justice anyway. Just in general, my thoughts, I've been always shooting and choosing low resolution Nikon cameras for their incredible ability to shoot great quality photos with unbelievable color in really low light scenarios. And so I knew going into this, getting a Z9 with this high resolution sensor, that it was probably going to suffer a little bit there, or at least not be comparable to what I'm used to. And I would say that held true, but I would say it's better than I anticipated. So thanks to the new technology and the sensor and the whole, concept of once you export these images and resize them down for something that's a little bit more usable, it's plenty fine. That helps to hide some of that noise that may be inherent up front, that I am maybe not used to seeing quite as much noise at the same ISOs with my previous D4S and the Nikon Z6 II. So overall, very happy with the files. I'm able to push them around a lot, shooting at really low ISOs, getting tons of dynamic range out of them. I'm not seeing any weird artifacts when I do that. Shooting quite literally directly into the sun. I'm loving the new ability to shoot, up to 32,000th of a second instead of being stuck at 8,000th of a second. So that's been wonderful. And yeah, these files have been classically Nikon files. Colors are what I'm used to, and just overall look pretty much what I'm used to. Oddly enough, it seems like the mid-range ISOs, like in the 800 to 1600 range, which is, kind of low for me with what I shoot most of the time. Those seem to be a little bit more noisy than when it starts getting up into the 4,000 to, 16,000 ISO range. Those seem actually closer and more comparable to what I'm used to seeing with the Z6 II and the D4S, which is a really nice thing. So one other thing, I am also shooting on the high efficiency RAW so that it keeps the file sizes down pretty close to what I was getting with the Z6 II. So that's helped out quite a bit. That way I can get a decent number of images on my card as well as on the hard drive without taking up a ton of space. That's it, guys. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you got something helpful out of this. I hope it's helpful to see actually what it's looking like when I'm shooting. And yeah, I'm gonna get out and shoot with this more. I'm gonna do the same thing I did with the Z6 II though, and in probably a few months, I'll put out a follow-up thoughts and review on this camera, which at that point I would say can be a full review, and I can give you my actual overall opinion on this camera. I just can't do it quite yet. And with that plane going over, I'll say goodbye.